So I didn't actually start my business until I already had that first client and I was working with them. So finding that first client's going to be really important. Assuming they found that first client, doing great work and making people remember you as easy to work with.
Today, my guest is Dan Linn. Dan is the founder and CEO of Hello World. Dan, it's great to have you. Please introduce yourself and the company and tell us what you do.
Absolutely. My name is Dan Linn. I've been a developer for almost 30 years now, and I started Hello World about 10 years ago as a place to focus purely on web development. Since then, we've expanded our services to include most full service marketing services, and we have broadened our tech stacks into other areas away from websites, including API integrations and now blockchain and AI development.
Wow, covering all your bases there.
Right.
Definitely.
Adapt or die.
So you started 10 years ago. What was that moment for you where you're like, I think I can and I could and maybe I should build a business.
Well, it actually happened. It coincided with some freelance work I was doing. In addition to being on the leadership team at the agency I was with, it occurred to me that this project I was working with, freelancing, was running much smoother than some of the projects I was dealing with at the agency. And I decided that if I could secure that client and another client, then I'd be essentially self sufficient. I didn't have necessarily goals of building a grand company. As I started taking on more clients, generally through word of mouth, that meant I needed to get more work done, and that meant I needed help. So all of a sudden, I'm contacting somebody else to see if they'll help me out on a site, and it was very congenial. Just hey, let's work on this together, and then it eventually just kind of turned a little more formal. I'd say that that first year was a lot of coffee shop work, a lot of meeting at the park to get stuff done. After that first year, we really kind of were able to solidify and start putting in some real business processes.
How many customers do you have today?
Oh, how many customers today? I think the last count we had was 22 customers.
Okay, wow. Good, good size, very impressive customer roster.
Thanks.
Some very, very nice brands on there. I remember, in preparation for this call, we had talked about kind of how you got some of those engagements going. And you mentioned that a lot of them came from referrals, partnerships. And I think that's super interesting. I think a lot of founders would like love to be in that position where they're, doing great work, they make someone happy and they get a referral. And it kind of builds this continuous chain where they're just consistently getting referrals. But I've also found that sometimes that can add another layer of stress to the engagement because you want to impress the person that sent you the referral. You want to make them look good and you want to have them keep sending referrals. Is that something that you've seen too? And if so, like how do you approach that? How do you navigate that when you're delivering your work?
Yeah, generally it hasn't come up. We like to provide pretty pretty good work, and it's never happened where I felt bad for the person who referred except once. And when that happened, I simply went back to the person and I said, hey, I was authentic in our answer. I said, this is what happened. We're sorry that it happened. It's the only mistake our company's ever made, and we hope you don't hold it against us. They were fine with that response and actually appreciated that I came to them with that.
Wow. I'm sure that's a very humbling experience and like a learning experience. And it probably got you even further with the customer and the person that referred you.
Definitely, definitely it helped.
Yeah. And when you're, well, let me take a step back. The development space is, dare I say, crowded, fairly crowded. I think it depends on, which part of the space you're in, but let's say professional services in the tech world are fairly crowded. So how do you look to separate yourselves from the competition and differentiate yourselves even further?
Absolutely. The way we do that is we build relationships with our clients, right? We're not just necessarily here to hear your words, put those words directly into a ticket and start typing on a keyboard, right? We want to work with our clients and figure out what their actual needs are. Oftentimes we can come up with a solution that they hadn't even considered that may be a better option for them. So partnership is what we try to hang our hat on there.
Can you go a little bit further into that? Like, is that like you are acting as like a employee at their company or more as like a trusted advisor, all of the above?
Yes and yes, right? In fact, for one of our clients, we actually had one of our employees kind of don their product owner hat, right? So they acted like the product owner at that company, suggesting changes, talking about client concerns and such. So yeah, that absolutely happens. Another way we were able to grow early on was through offering ourselves up to other companies also as temporary employees there, right? So supplemental development. So that was something we were kind of already versed in.
That's awesome. When it comes to like where you see the company going, because you offer so many different options in your repertoire of services, what are some of the areas that you think you want to maybe double down on or focus more on maybe the rest of this year and the next year?
Sure. One of our big themes this year is stability. We really want to make sure that customers just feel completely secure whenever we're working on one of their projects, right? Even down to the final deployment, right? We want them to feel completely secure that nothing's going to happen. So redoubling our efforts on any outstanding testing, adding additional testing where maybe we only had functional testing, we make sure to add visual testing. That's one area we're really doubling down to make sure that we can stay competitive. And then obviously AI. Certainly AI. We have 3 people on the staff actively pursuing AI degrees, right?
That's very impressive. What part of AI? Because it's so broad. Like we have, machine learning, synthetic data, generative AI. Are you kind of touching each of those or focusing on one?
We are not focusing on one. We're certainly finding our way, like a lot of folks right now. We have played in many of those technologies. I don't know that we've ruled anything out yet. We have experience in all of those areas. So until one of those technologies is deemed no good, we'll probably play with it.
Do you find yourself leveraging like the chatbots at all for any of your work?
Yes, absolutely. I've come to treat my AI as a very simple junior developer. I can't trust them to do actual development work, but I may be able to give them a small task, right? I have this SQL query and it's formatted for this system. Can you reformat it for this system? So it can do small tasks like that very well. Sometimes I'll ask it to help explain a concept if I'm not familiar with it. I don't understand why this developer did this. Do you have any ideas on why they would have done that? And it can't read minds, but it can do some pretty good coalescing of information to kind of give me a decent answer on that. Always take that with a grain of salt, of course, but certainly I use chatbots regularly in work. I often use it a lot in communications, right? Here's a problem I'm having. I need to discuss this with the client. Here are the factual points. How does this read to you? Granted, Grammarly was doing that for me before, but I certainly use AI for that. I also use it when I have a bit of an amorphous issue and I need to get to results quickly. I'll use it as a brainstorming tool, right? Where I am spitting ideas at it, asking what it thinks, telling it no, giving it different ideas. And generally, it helps me get to my conclusions that I would have gotten to anyway much faster.
Do you have a favorite chat tool?
No, I use multiple chat tools at all times. In fact, I have a IDE, a development environment that has an AI agent built into it. I have that one off on the side and I have that working on a personal project. I will give it a task. I will actually say, write a test to make sure that you can click on the logo on the homepage and it takes you to the homepage. And then once you've written that test, I want you to write code until that test passes. So it'll sit there over on my other screen, whirling around doing its thing. Meanwhile, I'm off using other chatbots to do smaller tasks and items while that one's plugging away.
Nice. And how have the results been?
Oh, they're mixed. They're definitely mixed. Every once in a while, I'll come back to it and it's like, hey, I only spent 2 minutes and gave you exactly what you needed. Other times I'll come back to it and it's a complete hallucination and it's often la la land. So it's definitely hit or miss, not production ready for sure, right? I'm not being replaced anytime soon. But it is a tool that I like to throw simple stuff at, kind of like I would a junior developer. Hey, do you think you can do this? And see what.
Yeah. Sometimes it's impressive and sometimes it's like to your point, yeah, I'm not going to be replaced anytime soon.
It has taught me some things that I did not know that were surprising. Some deep tricks. Yeah.
Anything you care to share?
Sure, it's a little technical, but I was using a library that we couldn't modify, and one of the classes had a method that I wanted to use. It showed me a way to instantiate their class using reflection, which allowed me to then modify that method to be accessible by the public, and I was able to use it.
Interesting.
Not something I'd seen before. A little devious.
Wow, very interesting. Well, when you think of the future and we talked about like maybe focusing on certain areas, you mentioned focusing on stability. Stability in the sense of like making sure you're delivering good work for your clients and creating stability within the relationship, right?
Yes, and also stability in day-to-day tasks. Still want to iron out the issue of client asked for the thing on Monday, got assigned to the developer on Tuesday, developer did it Wednesday, QA'd Thursday, finally got out Friday, right? That's kind of a long pipeline. Creating pipelines that are in a way less secure for changes that are less impactful so that they can get those done quicker while improving stability on the bigger changes and ensuring that those get all the tests and all the QA.
Yeah, that's super important. What do you think are some of the gaps right now that are maybe preventing that? And are there any tools, like any AI tools or any other tools that you are looking to implement that you think could create more efficiencies and helping you get to that goal of speeding up workflows and creating more stability?
Definitely. I think utilizing AI to actually run some of the tests and evaluate results is something we're looking at, right? Does the result of this visual regression test actually mean you can't deploy? Or does it mean that something just pushed something down and it's actually fine and you can move on? Having it make those decisions for us so that it can react and move quicker. We do have it performing code reviews on our pull requests. That's been great. It's always great to get more input on code. And even if we think what it says is kind of silly, it's still great to hear it. So adding that in definitely helps. And we have some ideas for some deployment tools that I can't exactly tell you the details on because we're still working.
Totally fair. No worries. In terms of implementing AI into your own marketing for yourself and maybe business development, have you explored what that looks like for you?
Yeah, a little bit. We have created a voice prompt for ChatGPT. Of course, now it has memory, so we don't need this anymore. But I had it fed it all of our company values, all of our blog posts, some emails from myself that I felt really encapsulated the company voice, and then asked it to create a prompt for me so that whenever I wrote an email, I could feed it this prompt and say, "This is who we are. This is Hello World. Now help me write this email in the voice of Hello World." And that's been really successful for us.
That's awesome. And are you deploying those as newsletters or blog posts or how is this content making its way out?
Yes to blog posts. Generally, it's mostly RFP responses. That's a big place we're using it. Any communications to client, we like to kind of just run it through the voice. If it's going to more than one client, it has to be run through the voice just to make sure.
Yeah, that keep everything on brand in check. Makes total sense. It's funny as I continue to talk with more and more founders and everything is through the vein of AI and go to market. I keep hearing this like, no, like we don't want to use AI for these tactics. Like we don't want to give up on interpersonal communication and human interaction, at least not yet. Like not that AI is at the point where it could replace us in that sense, but there's just still something special about getting on a call and talking to someone or getting in your car and going to meet someone at Starbucks or getting on a plane and going to your customer's office. Yeah, AI is just nowhere near being able to compete with that.
Yeah, no, definitely not. We had a situation today where we had some weirdness happening in an email thread, and we just said, we need to get on the phone about this. And as soon as we got on the phone, things got resolved very quickly. So yeah, it's not going to replace that anytime soon.
Yeah, way more powerful. Well, in terms of AI trends, and we touched on this a little bit so far, what do you think are some of the bigger trends within the dev space that we might see coming later this year, maybe next year? And of those trends, which ones do you think are maybe worth jumping on or worth avoiding?
Well, the first one that comes to mind is vibe coding, right? There are quite a number of people who are overnight developers and coding via ChatGPT, which I think is great, right? However, somebody just told me an anecdote where somebody was doing this really cool thing with React Native and had everything ready to go, and then called him up and said, "Hey, all my work's gone. It just hallucinated and deleted all my work. How do I get it back?" He said, "Well, just get it back from Git, roll back in Git." He's like, "What's Git?" So they weren't using version control. They didn't have anything in place and lost everything, right? So vibe coding is a thing, right? It reminds me of when like Photoshop came around and we could all be designers, right? Just because a tool is available doesn't mean that people are going to use it successfully, right?
Mhm.
However, we are going to see a rise of more and more vibe coding type applications. I've already seen at least one person bring their vibe coded application to us and ask if we could make it real. So I think there's going to be definitely more of that going around. I also think the deployment space, like I mentioned, deployment automation and AI testing, I think is going to be a pretty huge space. We're talking about RAG, retrieval augmented generation.
Mhm.
We have some folks working on some projects around that where we can get really optimized results based on data that we fed it and that it has access to. That's roughly my understanding of how that works.
That's awesome. Yeah. So what are some of the applications and use cases for you using RAG?
Uh, Great question. Code bases, right? The AI agents can be given access to your code base, but can they remember all of the ins and outs of it and all the context at any given point? Or can we make things like that available that they should look at every time when they're doing a query? So when we can actually talk to the AI about the code base on a larger level, then it maybe become much more powerful for us on the development side. Where will we see other applications? I believe we should start seeing instant rollback applications. As soon as it deploys something to test and any one of a number of triggers happens, it should just instantly roll back, right? There shouldn't be any discussion about that. That's kind of something we're looking at in the deployment space. I know there's a couple other people already working on that too. As far as other applications, I mean, vibe coding is going to make all sorts of weird stuff happen. I mentioned the downside of it, right? The bad vibe coding, but you're also going to get just radical new applications that wouldn't have been made necessarily by a developer, right? We need folks to come up with interesting and new ways to do stuff, and I think we're going to see that out of vibe coding, hopefully.
I'm not super familiar with vibe coding. What is it exactly?
Vibe coding has been described to me as someone who does not do coding using ChatGPT or another agent to code. So faking it? I'm not sure. But yeah, essentially just working with a chatbot to write the actual code, not being a developer or not knowing that particular framework.
Okay, yeah, so anybody can code now, essentially.
In
Maybe.
theory, I mean, yeah, my friend was telling me about how his buddy got an app on React Native on his phone just through ChatGPT. I've done that before and I had to utilize a lot of my skills. So that's impressive to me.
Is it, I mean, yeah, can the code be as robust and multifaceted, or is it simple, or is it just up to the prompt that you write?
That's a great question. Could the perfect set of prompts create a perfect program? I don't know the answer to that. Based on my experience, I don't think so yet. Not yet. I suppose it also depends on scale too, right? What are you trying to accomplish? I need a 4-page HTML site with a contact form. It's going to nail that, right? I need an enterprise learning management system. Results may vary, right? So, yeah, size is definitely going to be important.
Yeah,
Size of the task.
yeah. Because then otherwise, I think prompt engineering would be like the new coding. But even then, like people still are not great at prompt engineering.
Right. Yeah, and also like you're absolutely right. You could ask it something and you could be very clear in what you're asking it, but it could interpret that differently, give you something completely random, and now you're just off on a rabbit hole forever.
Yeah. Yeah, I've even found like when I use, GPT or my favorite chat tool right now is Perplexity. I don't really know why, but I like it. And I've noticed that if I am not satisfied with the answer, I'll ask it, I play around with it. I ask it to either rerun it or I'll just take the exact same prompt, copy it, maybe change like one or two words, and then I get something completely different. And so I'm like, I don't know. I thought I was good at prompt engineering, but yeah, maybe the tool interpreted it differently.
I like to play them against each other sometimes. So we had a project where we were evaluating two different pieces of software, right? And I asked ChatGPT, hey, can you compare these two pieces of software and tell me what you think we should go with, right? And it came back with one answer. And I gave it to Claude and I asked it the same thing and it came back with the other answer as the product. So I took the answer from ChatGPT and I told Claude, well, this is what ChatGPT said. What do you think about that? And I did the same thing over here. And then it came out, ChatGPT said, yeah, Claude was way better on that. You should probably go with Claude's answer. And Claude was like, yeah, I'm right. So
That's
it was pretty
amazing.
funny.
I need to start doing that. Well, a couple more questions for you, Dan. If someone is listening to this and they're thinking about starting their own dev company, what advice would you give someone? Like, what would you tell them to focus on, stay away from, or not worry about? What should they be spending their energy on in the first 6 months to a year?
I think the biggest thing is finding that first client. So I didn't actually start my business until I already had that first client and I was working with them. So finding that first client's going to be really important. Assuming they found that first client, doing great work and making people remember you as easy to work with. Especially as a developer, I feel that sometimes the ease of working with a company or a developer is often one of the only differentiators that they have. So making it easy to work with people. I told them I'd meet them wherever they're at, right? I can do this much of this project or I can do this much of this project. It's completely up to you, right? And how we work together was also up to them. So I was really adaptable and flexible early on. Adaptability is still one of our core values, though.
Yeah, it's super important. And that's interesting because I've asked other people, other founders and CEOs the same question, and I've learned that there's really like two schools of thought around that. There's the deliverability, like focus on delivering great work, and to your point, like being easy to work with and adaptable. But then I've heard the only other answer is business development, like go hard on that, hire someone for delivery. So I think it just kind of depends on like your style and your approach. And yeah, I mean, they're both super important. I wouldn't say that there's one right answer, one wrong answer. So it's always interesting to hear, what people think. But clearly, like you're doing something right. You've built a great business for the last 10 years. And again, you have some of those like fantastic logos on your website. So
Thank
kudos
you.
to you.
Appreciate that.
Yeah, absolutely. In terms of where you want to take the company, because you mentioned some things about creating stability from a growth perspective, what's top of mind? What do you think, is achievable this year and what are you focused on?
And what I'm focused on right now is there's a lot of really good talent that's been laid off. So I'm focused on making my team the best it can be to gear up for a very interesting 2026. So coiling is what we're doing this year.
Do you think that, and I've heard from podcasts, like I mentioned that I listen to different podcasts and hear some of like the big tech CEOs talk about 2025 being like that pivotal year for AI. So it sounds like you're thinking maybe next year, like build the team now and be ready for the big wave next year.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. Wave is an interesting word. I mean, I remember Web 2.0, right? And they talked about the Web 2.0 apocalypse, but it was more of a shakeout from what I saw where you had a bunch of folks who were able to do relatively simple development, but then when development got a little more complicated, it got a little trickier for people to accomplish that, and only the folks who were kind of able to do the development kind of rose to the top. So I see that happening again. Definitely. You mentioned how we're a little crowded in the dev space. I think there will be some sifting this year.
Interesting. Interesting. Why do you think that?
I think for one, there are a lot of developers out there, right? This rise of AI also coincides with the wave of code schools that pumped out a whole bunch of juniors, right? So I think there's going to necessarily be a number of folks who make career changes based on that. And I think the folks that are left are going to be likely more of the better developers.
I think you're right about that, but we'll just have to wait and see. Time will tell.
Yep, yep, definitely.
Dan, if anyone wants to reach out, if they want to learn more about Hello World, where can they find you?
They can find us at Hello World Devs. That's Hello World DEVS.com. Or they can find us on the internet. We're on there.
Google it, people.
That's right.
All right. Well, Dan, thank you so much. It's been a pleasure. Really enjoyed it.
Absolutely. Thank you very much for having me on.